I never thought I would hear my uncle, my own flesh and blood, whisper those words in the dead of night. I was hiding behind the thin walls of our home, my heart pounding in my chest, when I heard him say it. If Ode dies, the village will be mine. It felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. My uncle, Uncle Kola, had come back to our village not long ago, after years of traveling. He had always been distant, but he was family. He was supposed to help us now that my father, Chief Ode, was sick. But now, in the darkness, I heard his real plan, and it was like a heavy weight had settled on my chest. I didn't know what to do. How could I? I was only a boy, barely 10 years old. But the words I overheard that night told me one thing: Uncle Kola wasn't here to help us. He was waiting for my father to die. He wanted to take over the village, and maybe even worse, he might be the reason my father was so sick. But let me start from the beginning. When my father first became ill, no one knew what was wrong. He had been a strong man, always full of life and laughter. One day, he just changed. His energy was gone. He would lie in bed all day, barely able to lift his head. My mother, Mama Yemi, was heartbroken. She spent every moment by his side, trying to care for him, praying for him to get better. The healers came, but none of their medicines worked. Then Uncle Kola arrived. He hadn't been in the village for as long as I could remember, but when he walked through our door with his confident smile and promises to help, everyone seemed relieved. At first, I was happy he was there. He told us stories of his travels, gave me small gifts from the faraway lands he'd visited, and told Mama not to worry. He would take care of things while my father was sick. But little by little, something in him changed. His smile faded, his voice became sharper, and his eyes grew colder. It wasn't just me who noticed. The villagers started whispering that Uncle Kola was making strange decisions, like telling people to bring him food and gifts for protection, or banning them from visiting my father without his permission. I didn't understand it at first. How could someone who was family act this way? But after hearing those words that night, I knew I had to figure out what was really going on. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening. I kept thinking about what I'd overheard. I knew I needed help, but I didn't know who to trust. My mother was too upset to notice the changes in Uncle Kola. I was just a boy. What could I do? I decided to follow my uncle. I watched him carefully, noticing the times when he would sneak away late at night. My curiosity grew into fear when I saw him walking into the forest, carrying strange objects. I didn't dare ask him what he was doing, but I knew something was wrong. One night, when the house was quiet, I crept through the hallway toward my father's room. I wanted to check on him, to make sure he was still okay, though I knew he wasn't. As I got closer to the door, I heard my uncle's voice again, chanting softly. The sound sent chills down my spine. I peeked through a crack in the door, and my heart nearly stopped. Uncle Kola was standing over my father, holding a small black stone that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. His hand hovered above my father's chest, and his lips moved in that same strange chant. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it wasn't good. I stood frozen, unable to breathe. In that moment, I realized Uncle Kola was the reason my father was dying. He was using some kind of dark magic to weaken him, slowly draining his life. My hands shook as I backed away from the door, desperate to escape without being seen. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. What I had seen wasn't normal. It wasn't just a trick or something my young mind had made up. It was real, and it was happening right under our roof. The next morning, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I needed help, but I didn't know who to turn to. I thought of Baba Femi, the oldest man in our village. He had always been kind to me, and people said he knew things that no one else did. I decided to go to him, even though my legs trembled with fear. When I told Baba Femi what I had seen, his face grew serious. He wasn't surprised. He nodded slowly, and then he spoke. There is something dark at work here, Tunde. Your uncle is using powers he shouldn't be. but there is still hope. If you are brave, you can stop him. Hope. That word was all I needed to hear. Even though I was scared, I knew I couldn't let my father die without trying to save him. Baba Femi told me about a powerful charm hidden deep in the forest, a charm that could break the spell Uncle Kola had cast on my father. It was created long ago by the ancestors to protect the village from evil. As I listened to Baba Femi, I felt a small spark of courage grow inside me. I didn't know how I would do it, but I knew one thing for sure: I was going to find that charm, and I was going to save my father. The journey to the forest was the most terrifying thing I had ever done. It was early morning when I set out, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the village. I had never been to the deep part of the forest before, the place where the charm was hidden. The elders often told stories of strange things happening there, things that children like me were warned to stay away from. But I had no choice. My father's life depended on it. I carried only a small bag of food and a knife that Mama used for cutting vegetables. I knew it wouldn't be much help if anything happened, but it made me feel a little braver. The trees in the forest were tall and thick, their branches reaching out like twisted arms, blocking out the sunlight. As I walked deeper, the air grew cooler, and the sounds of the village faded away until there was nothing but the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. Every now and then, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Baba Femi had told me where to find the charm. It was hidden near a large, ancient tree at the heart of the forest, marked with carvings from long ago. The journey would take a few hours, and he warned me to be careful. The forest was full of hidden dangers. As I walked, my mind kept drifting back to my father. What if I didn't make it in time? What if Uncle Kola's magic grew stronger and there was nothing left of my father when I returned? The thought made my stomach twist in fear, but I pushed it away. I had to keep moving. I had to be brave. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the center of the forest. The air here was even colder, and the trees seemed older, their trunks thick and twisted. In the middle of it all stood the ancient tree Baba Femi had described. It was enormous, its bark dark and rough, covered in strange carvings that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. This was it, the place where the charm was hidden. I approached the tree cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to expect. Would the charm be buried in the ground? Hidden in a hollow trunk? I reached out and touched the tree, feeling its rough bark beneath my fingers. As I did, something strange happened. The carvings on the tree began to glow brighter, and the ground beneath my feet trembled. I stumbled back, fear gripping me, but I didn't run. I knew this was the charm reacting to my presence. Baba Femi had said only someone with a pure heart could find it. Suddenly, a small crack appeared at the base of the tree. The earth parted slowly, revealing a tiny, shimmering object nestled in the roots. It was the charm, a simple stone, no bigger than my palm, but it glowed with a soft, warm light. I reached down and picked it up, feeling its warmth spread through my fingers. It was almost as if the stone was alive, pulsing with energy. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of calm. The charm was real. I had found it. But just as quickly as the calm came, it vanished, replaced by a wave of dread. The forest had grown silent, too silent. The birds had stopped singing, the wind had stopped rustling the leaves, and the air felt thick, heavy with something dark. I turned to leave, clutching the charm tightly in my hand, but my path was no longer clear. The trees seemed closer now, their branches twisting together like a wall, blocking my way. Panic rose in my chest, and I looked around frantically for another way out. That's when I heard it, a low, growling sound, coming from somewhere deep within the shadows. My heart raced. Something was out there, watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, waiting for me to make a move. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to get back to the village, back to my father. With no other choice, I darted toward the only opening I could see, my feet pounding against the forest floor as I ran. The growling grew louder, closer, and I could hear branches snapping behind me as something large followed. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, clutching the charm as if it were my only lifeline. The trees whipped past me, and my breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. I had no idea how far I had run, but I didn't stop until I could see the edge of the forest, the faint light of the village beyond the trees. I burst through the tree lane, my chest burning, my legs aching, but I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the village. When I finally collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, I realized I had made it. I had the charm. But I couldn't celebrate yet. I had to hurry to my father's side before it was too late. I rushed home, bursting through the door and calling for Mama. She was sitting by my father's bed, her face pale with worry. I didn't have time to explain everything to her. I knelt by my father's side and held the charm over him, just like Baba Femi had told me to. For a moment, nothing happened. My father lay still, his breathing shallow, his face pale and drawn. I closed my eyes, silently praying for the charm to work, for some sign that I hadn't come all this way for nothing. And then, I felt it, a soft pulse from the stone. The charm began to glow, its light spreading over my father like a warm blanket. Slowly, I saw the color return to his face, his breathing grew stronger, and his eyes fluttered open. He was waking up. Tears filled my eyes as I watched my father come back to life. I had done it. I had saved him. But as I looked down at the charm in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over yet. Uncle Kola was still out there, and now he knew that I had discovered his secret. I had saved my father for now, but I knew that the real fight was just beginning. The relief of seeing my father wake up didn't last long. As he stirred and slowly opened his eyes, a smile of pure joy spread across my face. My mother gasped, rushing to his side, tears streaming down her cheeks. But deep down, I couldn't shake the fear that still clung to me. Uncle Kola, he would know what I had done. My father blinked, looking confused but no longer weak. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a soft rasp. What happened?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. Mama Yemi, still crying, held his hand tightly. "You were sick, Ode. We didn't know what was wrong. But look at you now. You're back." I swallowed hard, unsure of how much to tell them. My father deserved to know the truth, but I wasn't sure if I could face what came next. Uncle Kola's plan had failed, but for how long? I glanced out the window, half expecting to see his shadow lurking nearby. "I found a way to help, Baba," I said softly, holding up the charm in my hand. Its glow had faded now, but I could still feel its power. "Baba Femi told me about this. It's what saved you." Mama Yemi looked at the charm, her eyes wide. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Tunde, what did you do?" "I went into the forest," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I had to find it. Uncle Kola, he's not who we think he is. He was using magic to make Baba sick." The room fell silent. My mother's face paled, and my father, though still weak, sat up straighter, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "What do you mean, Kola was doing this?" "He's my brother." I overheard him, I said quickly, the words spilling out as I tried to explain everything. "He wants to take over the village. He thought if you were gone, no one would stop him from becoming chief. I saw him, he was using some kind of dark magic on you. That's why you've been so sick." My father looked stunned, and Mama Yemi gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. It was hard to believe even for me, and I had seen it with my own eyes. But there was no time to let the shock sink in. I knew Uncle Kola wouldn't wait for long before making his next move. "We have to stop him," I continued, standing up, my voice stronger now. "He'll know I've broken the spell, and he'll come after us. We can't just sit here." My father, still trying to make sense of it all, nodded slowly. "If what you're saying is true," he began, "then Kola is a threat not just to us, but to the entire village. We need to act fast." As my father regained his strength, we quickly made a plan. We would confront Uncle Kola before he could gather any more power. My father, the rightful chief, would call for the council of elders to meet and expose Uncle Kola's treachery. But we had to be careful. If Uncle Kola had more dark magic at his disposal, we didn't know what he was capable of. As the day wore on, the village began to stir with whispers. My father's miraculous recovery spread quickly, and soon the elders were gathered in our home, ready to hear the truth. My heart raced as they sat in a circle, their faces grave. Uncle Kola was summoned, and he arrived with that same confident smile he always wore, but his eyes flickered with something darker. The moment he stepped inside, I felt the tension in the room rise. Uncle Kola looked around, his smile faltering slightly when he saw my father sitting upright, healthy and alert. His gaze shifted to me, and for a brief second, I saw something cold and calculating in his eyes. He knew. "Kola," my father said, his voice strong despite the days of sickness. "You have a lot to answer for." Uncle Kola's smile faded entirely. "What is this about, Ode?" he asked, feigning innocence. "I've done nothing but help you and your family." "You've done more than that," my father replied, standing up. "You've been using dark magic against me, trying to take my place as chief. Ton saw you. He overheard your plans, and we have proof." The elders murmured in disbelief, their eyes darting between my father and Uncle Kola. Uncle Kola's face darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He hadn't expected to be caught. "Lies," Uncle Kola spat, his voice growing sharp. "You listen to a child's stories. You accuse me, your own brother, without evidence." My father stood firm, his eyes blazing with anger. "Ton saw you using magic, Kola. He found the charm that broke your spell. Your plan has failed." Uncle Kola's face twisted with rage. His calm, composed facade cracked, and for the first time, the true darkness inside him was revealed. "You think you can stop me," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't know what I'm capable of." Suddenly, the air in the room grew thick, heavy with a sinister energy. Uncle Kola raised his hand, and before anyone could react, a dark shadow seemed to gather around him. The elders gasped, and Mama Yemi pulled me close, her grip tight with fear. But just as quickly as the darkness appeared, my father stepped forward, holding the charm in his hand. The stone glowed once again, and the shadows around Uncle Kola began to waver. "You've already lost, Kola," my father said, his voice steady. "Your power ends here." With a furious scream, Uncle Kola lunged toward my father, but the glow of the charm flared brighter, and he was thrown back, crashing to the ground. The dark magic that had surrounded him dissipated, leaving him weak and defeated. The room was silent as the elders stood, their faces filled with shock and disgust. My father turned to them, holding the charm high. "This is the power that has been poisoning our village," he said. "Kola has betrayed us all." The elders nodded solemnly. Uncle Kola, once proud and powerful, lay crumpled on the floor, his face twisted in defeat. He had lost everything. As the elders moved to take him away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over, Uncle Kola's reign of darkness had ended. My father was safe, and the village was free. But as I looked down at the charm in my hand, I couldn't help but wonder. The power in that stone was ancient, and though it had saved us this time, I knew there were still forces in the world beyond our understanding. And somewhere, deep in the forest, I could still hear the distant echoes of the growling that had followed me that night. The danger wasn't gone. It had only just begun. The village slowly returned to normal after Uncle Kola's defeat. People whispered about what had happened in our home that day, the dark magic, the charm, and how my father had been saved. My father, once again in his role as chief, began the slow process of healing, not just for himself, but for the entire village. But something was different now. Even though Uncle Kola had been taken away, locked in a small hut at the edge of the village under the watchful eyes of the elders, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness wasn't truly gone. The charm had protected us, but I knew from the look in Baba Femi's eyes when I returned it that its power came with a cost. He hadn't said it directly, but I could feel it. There was something more to this story, something waiting in the shadows. It started with small things. First, the animals in the village grew restless. The goats and chickens, usually calm, began to act strangely, running in circles, refusing to eat, or staring off into the distance as if they sensed something invisible to the rest of us. The air felt different too, heavier, like the forest had shifted. The once welcoming trees now seemed to lean in closer, their branches casting long shadows over the village even when the sun was high in the sky. One evening, as I sat by the fire with Mama and Baba, a knock came at our door. It was Baba Femi. His old face looked more serious than usual, his eyes filled with a warning he hadn't yet spoken. My father welcomed him in, offering him a seat by the fire, but Baba Femi shook his head. "I'm afraid there is no time to sit," he said quietly. "I've come to warn you, Ode. What we faced with Kola was only the beginning." My heart sank. I had feared this moment. "What do you mean?" my father asked, frowning. "Kola is locked away. His magic is broken." Baba Femi nodded, but his expression remained grim. "Yes, Kola's power is broken, but the darkness he called upon is not easily defeated. The charm worked to protect you, but it was not a permanent solution. The forces Kola tried to control, they have been awakened. And they are angry." A chill ran down my spine. I could see Mama gripping her hands tightly, trying to stay calm, but the fear in her eyes matched the one growing inside me. "There are signs," Baba Femi continued. "The animals, the trees, the very air around us, it is all reacting to what happened. And there is more." He paused, looking directly at me. "The charm you used, Tunde, it called to something far older than we can understand. Something deep within the forest." My father stood up, his face set in a hard line. "What are you saying, Femi? What danger are we facing?" Baba Femi looked into the fire, his voice low and serious. "The forest spirits. The ones who have watched over this land for generations. They do not take kindly to humans meddling in their realm. Kola's magic was a violation, and now that he has been defeated, they will seek balance. They will come for the one who used the charm." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Me. The spirits would come for me. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I only used the charm to help my father. I didn't want to meddle with anything." Baba Femi sighed, his old hands trembling slightly. "I know, Tunde. But the spirits see things differently. To them, even the use of the charm was a disturbance. They will want something in return." My father clenched his fist. "Then we'll protect him. Whatever comes, we'll fight it." But Baba Femi shook his head. "This is not something we can fight with swords or strength, Ode. This is the power of the land itself. The spirits must be appeased, or they will unleash their fury." I didn't know what to say. My whole body felt cold, like a shadow had wrapped itself around me. The idea of facing these spirits, these ancient forces that I barely understood, terrified me. I had already seen how powerful Uncle Kola's magic was. What could I possibly do against the forest itself? "We must act quickly," Baba Femi continued. "There is a way, but it will not be easy." "What do we need to do?" my father asked, his voice determined. Baba Femi turned to me, his eyes full of sorrow. "Tunde must go to the heart of the forest, the place where he found the charm. There, he must offer himself to the spirits. Only then will they decide his fate." My heart pounded in my chest. Offer myself. What does that mean? What will they do to me? "I do not know," Baba Femi admitted. "But I do know that they will decide whether you are worthy to be spared, or if a greater sacrifice must be made." Mama gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "No. He's just a boy. He can't do this." "I'm afraid he must," Baba Femi said softly. "If we do nothing, the spirit's anger will spread. The village will suffer." Tears welled up in Mama's eyes, and my father placed a hand on her shoulder, his face grim. "We won't let anything happen to you, Tunde. We'll find a way." But deep down, I knew there was no escaping this. The forest had called me once before, and now it was calling me again. I had to go back. That night, as the village settled into uneasy sleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing, replaying everything Baba Femi had said. The thought of returning to that ancient tree, the place where I had found the charm, filled me with dread. But I knew I had no choice. As the first light of dawn broke over the village, I made my decision. I would go to the forest and face the spirits. Whatever happened, I had to protect my family, my village. The next morning, as I prepared to leave, my father stopped me at the door. "You're brave, Tunde," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you don't have to do this alone." I nodded, grateful for his support, but I knew this was something I had to face by myself. The spirits had called me, and only I could answer. With a final glance at my family, I stepped out into the early morning light and began my journey back into the forest, the weight of the unknown heavy on my shoulders. The forest loomed ahead, dark and silent, waiting for me. And this time, I knew there would be no turning back. As I walked deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to grow taller, their branches thicker, as if they were watching me. The silence was unnerving, not even a bird chirped or a leaf rustled. My heart pounded in my chest, my footsteps the only sound breaking the eerie stillness. I clutched the small charm tightly in my hand, even though its glow had faded long ago. I wasn't sure if it would help me this time, but it was the only connection I had to the power I had called upon before. The path to the ancient tree felt both familiar and terrifying, as if the forest remembered me and the spirits were waiting for my return. After hours of walking, I finally arrived at the heart of the forest. There it was, the ancient tree, towering above everything else, its twisted branches reaching into the sky. The carvings on its bark glowed faintly, just like they had before. But this time, something was different. The air felt heavy, charged with energy. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. I stepped forward, my legs trembling, and stood before the tree. My voice was small, but it echoed through the quiet. "I'm here," I said, my heart racing. "I've come to offer myself." For a moment, nothing happened. The forest was still, the tree silent. I began to wonder if the spirits would even respond. But then, the ground beneath me began to tremble, and a low rumble echoed through the air. The carvings on the tree glowed brighter, and I felt a strange force pulling me closer, as if the tree itself was drawing me in. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was not human, but a spirit, a being made of light and shadow, its form shifting and changing as it moved. Its eyes glowed with a deep, ancient wisdom, and it hovered before me, silent and powerful. "You have come," the spirit said, its voice like the wind through the trees, both soft and strong. "You used the power of the charm, and now you seek the balance." I nodded, my throat dry. I didn't mean to disturb the spirits. I just wanted to save my father. The spirit studied me for a long moment, its glowing eyes piercing into my soul. "You acted out of love," it said finally. "But even love can upset the balance of the world. The charm you used is connected to the spirit of the forest, and by calling upon its power, you have drawn their attention." I swallowed hard. "What will happen now? Will you punish me?" The spirit was silent for a moment, its form shifting like smoke in the wind. "The spirits are not cruel," it said. "But they demand respect. You must prove your worth, young one. If you can show us that you understand the weight of the power you have called upon, then you will be spared." "How?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do I have to do?" The spirit's gaze softened, and it reached out, its hand hovering just above mine. "You must walk through the forest and face your greatest fear. Only then will the spirits know your heart." I didn't know what my greatest fear was, but I could feel it lurking somewhere deep within me, waiting to be revealed. Without another word, the spirit vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone in the clearing. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. But then I felt it, a cold wind, blowing through the trees, carrying with it the sound of whispers. The forest was alive, and it was calling me forward. With no other choice, I began to walk. The forest grew darker the further I went, the trees closing in around me, their branches twisting into strange, unsettling shapes. Shadows danced on the ground, and the whispers grew louder, filling my ears with words I couldn't understand. Suddenly, I stumbled into a small clearing, and there, in the center, I saw it, my greatest fear. It wasn't a monster or a spirit. It wasn't even Uncle Kola. It was me. In the middle of the clearing stood a reflection of myself, but this version of me was different. It was older, with eyes filled with anger and bitterness. This was the version of myself I feared becoming, the one who would let fear and darkness consume him, who would seek power like Uncle Kola, who would forget the love that had driven him to use the charm in the first place. The reflection stared back at me, its eyes cold and accusing. "You think you're different," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "But you're just like him. You used the charm. You called upon the spirits. What makes you any better than Uncle Kola?" I stepped back, fear tightening in my chest. "I didn't mean to," I whispered. "I just wanted to help my family." The reflection sneered. "And what happens when you need power again? Will you call upon the spirits once more? Will you take from them what isn't yours?" I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. "No, I won't. I understand now. The power isn't mine to take. I used it because I was afraid. But I won't make that mistake again." The reflection's eyes narrowed, but I stood my ground. "I know who I am," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I won't let fear control me. I won't let power corrupt me. I won't become like Uncle Kola." For a moment, the reflection didn't move. Then, slowly, it began to fade, its form dissolving into the shadows. The clearing grew brighter, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The spirits had heard my heart. As the darkness lifted, the spirit from before reappeared, its eyes glowing with approval. "You have faced your fear," it said. "And you have shown the spirits that your heart is pure. The balance has been restored." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "So, it's over." The spirit nodded. "The danger has passed. The spirits will leave your village in peace. But remember, young one, power must always be respected. The forest will always be watching." With that, the spirit faded into the trees, and the forest around me grew calm once more. The tension in the air lifted, and the path home became clear. I made my way back to the village, feeling lighter than I had in days. When I finally returned, my family was waiting for me, their faces full of relief and love. I had faced the darkness, both within the forest and within myself. And I had survived. But I knew that the lessons I had learned, the respect for the power of the spirits, the importance of love and courage, would stay with me forever. The forest would always be there, a reminder of the balance between light and dark, and the choices we make that shape who we are. And though the danger had passed, I knew that the world was full of mysteries I had yet to discover. But for now, I was home. And I was at peace.